Today I'm going to teach you the basics of wheel throwing. And I'm going to do this on an electric wheel. There are also kick wheels that you can use for the very same process, but the electric wheel takes away some of the difficulty of kicking the actual wheel as you work. First things you need to do for wheel throwing is you need to get your area prepared. First, put on an apron. It's a messy job. You need a bucket of water with a sponge inside it. I prefer using one of these wooden tools with a sharp end on it, a wooden rib, a pin tool, and you will need also a wire cutter at some point. The Shimpo wheels that we're using here have a splash pan attached to them that comes off in two parts here and are held together by pins on both sides. Brent wheels and others don't have these pins, they just lock into themselves. You'll also want to use a plastic bat because we have bat pins on these wheel heads. And the plastic bat fits right over the bat pins on either side. There are two of them, so you lock one in and then you lock the other one in. This bat isn't particularly clean, so I'm going to clean it off. But instead of scrubbing it, I'm going to turn my wheel on and use the motion of the wheel to clean that wheel head. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want any dry clay on there. So I'm going to get rid of that, and then I'll be good to begin. So I've already prepared about a 2-pound ball of clay, which is exactly what you want to start with, and I've wedged it, and then I've made it into a sphere because it's easier to begin throwing with. So you start by taking your sponge and wetting down the bat just slightly. You don't want water coming off of it. You want it just wet enough that your finger would get slightly damp if you put it on there. And then you take your clay and put it into the middle of the bat. You want to put it there with force. You're not going to slam it so it spreads, but make sure it's sticky. That's necessary. Then you're going to take your wheel, and I'm turning my wheel all the way up. I have a hand pedal here as well, but I'm using my foot so I can be hands-free this whole time. And you're going to start by centering the clay. To center the clay, you have the wheel going at full blast, and then you're going to put your two hands on either side of the clay to try to just even it out a little bit. See how it's bumpy here? I'm just going to put my hands on there and even it. Not doing too much more than starting to even it out. Notice that as I'm holding onto the clay with my hands, my elbows are locking into my knees because it makes it sturdier. So I'm going to continue doing that and pressing in until it's nice and even. At this point, once it's getting more even, I'm going to start coning the clay, which is the second part of centering, and that's where you take your left hand, if you're a righty, and you take the palm of your left hand and you make a scooping motion with it. So you're pulling that clay up out of this big mound on the bottom into your right hand over here, which catches it in that whole central palm area. I always have to keep that clay wet as I'm working so that it never holds and pulls. So I'm doing this with my fingers so that you can see. If it's a larger piece of clay, I would need to use my whole hand. But you can tell I'm scooping with my left hand up, and my right hand is stabilizing and catching. Coning the clay is a really important part of centering because it makes sure not only that your clay is even throughout and not lumpy on one side or another, but it also gets rid of any air bubbles. So I've coned the clay up. Now I'm going to cone it down. I'm going to cone it with my right palm pushing into my left hand to bring it back down. I always have to make sure my hands are nice and stable throughout this process. So again, my left hand as I'm doing this is locked into my leg. My right hand is free at the moment because I can move it without too much, but if it's difficult for you to remain stable, lock your right elbow into your leg again. So I need to cone at least 3 times before my clay is truly centered. And you'll be able to feel it. You'll know when it's actually centered. So I cone up pretty high, and then I'm going to cone it back down. When I cone it down, I'm not pushing straight down, and I'm not pushing straight across. I'm doing something in between. It's like I'm scooping it. And I think that's the most difficult part of coning to understand, but it's actually going to help you out a lot. So you're going to cone, as I said, 3 times, more if necessary. And you really want to make sure you've got that base of the clay up and evened out. For something this small, I tend to use my fingers a lot. And I get rid of that extra clay. Even though the process is messy, your hands really need to remain pretty clean so that you can feel what's going on with the clay. So I'm going to wet it down, and I'm going to cone it back down one more time. We should be in pretty good shape. And at this point, we're on to the 3rd stage of centering, and the last stage. We want to make it now into a cylinder shape. And I'm going to do that by taking the edge of my palm, right here, and pressing down from the middle. My left side is going to protect that and keep it even. So my left side is on the side of the clay, my right side is on the top. And I'm going to flatten out the top so I've got a cylinder. Then I'm going to take my right hand, and with my right finger, I'm going to even out the side. And here my clay wasn't completely centered, so it actually did rise a little bit. So I need to bring it down again on the top. I'm just going to even it out until I have a good cylinder. And that's a great base to make a simple pot. So now my clay is centered, and I'm ready to start opening out, which is the 2nd major stage of throwing. So to open out, I continue to have my wheel at full speed. Everything we've done so far is full speed. I'm going to take my left hand, and I'm going to pull it towards me a bit more than before. Before it was on the side, now it's towards me. My right hand, I'm going to lean on my left hand so it's nice and stable. And I'm going to take that finger and poke it down and in, trying to go straight down rather than at an angle. You want to make sure your clay is nice and wet at this point so it's sliding through your fingers. And then, after you've got your hole, you want to get that hole down to about where you've got maybe rather a ½ an inch to a centimeter left of your clay. If you're not sure, here's how to check. Stop your reel, take your pin tool, and put it down and into that hole. Take your finger and put it at the edge of where that clay stops, and pull it up. I can see that I've got about 3/4 of an inch there, maybe a little bit too much. I would want it to only be about there if I really want that base correct. So that hole will be covered through the process, and we don't have to worry about creating air there. I'm going to start it up again at full speed and push down a little bit further so that I've got really only that centimeter or so